The insult landed before the cabin doors even closed. "Is this a joke?" Bradley Carrington's voice cut across the hush of the first-class cabin like a thrown glass. He was pointing, actually pointing, with a manicured finger at the old man easing himself into the window seat across the aisle. "Somebody tell me this man is in the wrong section. Somebody tell me I did not pay $11,000 to sit next to that." The old man didn't flinch. He just kept folding his coat, slow and careful, the way a person folds something that matters to them, and set it on his lap like a sleeping cat. His name was Walter Hayes, 78 years old. His coat was the brown of a thing that had been washed too many times in cheap motel sinks, the cuffs gone soft and pale. His shoes were clean but cracked along the bend. He carried no roller bag, no leather briefcase, no phone glowing in his hand. Just a small canvas duffel, the kind soldiers used to be issued, and a paper boarding pass folded into a neat square in his shirt pocket. And pinned beneath the lapel of that worn brown coat, so small you'd miss it unless the light caught it, was a tarnished little medal on a faded ribbon, pale blue, dull with age. He kept his hand near it without seeming to, the way you keep a hand near something you'd die before you'd lose. You'll want to remember that medal, hold on to it, because everyone on that plane was about to learn what it meant, everyone except the one man too busy sneering to look. Bradley Carrington was 41 and ran a hedge fund the way some men run a kingdom. $3,000 suit, a watch that cost more than Walter's apartment did in a year. He had the kind of tan that comes from yacht decks and the kind of confidence that comes from never once being told no. He was flying east for the biggest meeting of his life, a closing dinner with the board of a company he'd spent 2 years circling like a shark, the deal that would put his name in every financial paper in the country. And now there was an old vagrant in his cabin, breathing his air. "Miss." He snapped his fingers at the flight attendant. Snapped them. "Miss, over here. There's been a mistake." Her name tag said A&A. She came over with the patient smile of someone who had absorbed 1,000 snapped fingers and learned to let them roll off. "How can I help, sir?" "You can move him." Bradley didn't lower his voice. He raised it, so the whole cabin could share in his disgust. "This is first class. I don't know how he got a ticket, probably some charity thing. Some Make-A-Wish for the homeless. But I am not spending 6 hours next to a man who clearly hasn't seen a shower since the last administration." A woman 2 rows up winced. A businessman buried his face deeper in his laptop, pretending very hard to be somewhere else. That's the thing about cruelty in public. Most people don't join it, but most people don't stop it either. They just get very interested in their screens. Anna's smile tightened. "Sir, this gentleman has a valid first-class ticket, the same as you. There's no mistake. I'd be happy to bring you a drink while we—" "I don't want a drink. I want him gone." Bradley leaned across the aisle now, close enough that Walter could have reached out and touched him. "Hey, old-timer, you understand English. This isn't a soup kitchen. This isn't a bus station bench. People like me earned our way up here. What did you do, find a ticket in a trash can?" Walter Hayes turned his head, slowly, and he looked at Bradley Carrington with eyes the color of a winter sky, pale and clear and utterly, unnervingly calm. "I bought it," Walter said. His voice was quiet and a little rough, like gravel under a slow tire. "Same as you, that was all." He turned back to the window, and somehow that quiet did more damage to Bradley's composure than any shout could have, because men like Bradley feed on reaction. They poke and poke, waiting for the flinch, the stammer, the begging, the proof that they're bigger. And Walter had just handed him nothing. A locked door, a wall. So Bradley did what small men do when they can't get a rise. He got louder. "Unbelievable," he announced to the cabin at large, throwing his hands up. "You know what's wrong with this country. This. Exactly this. I work 18-hour days. I built something. And the airline puts me next to a man who probably hasn't worked a day in 30 years, who lives off the rest of us, and I'm supposed to just smile about it. He turned back to Anna. I want to speak to whoever is in charge of this cabin, right now. Here's what Bradley didn't know. Here's what nobody in that cabin knew yet, except maybe the old man himself. Walter Hayes wasn't flying east for a vacation. He wasn't flying for a deal or a meeting or a chance to climb anything. He was flying to keep a promise that was 53 years old. He'd made that promise in the worst place a young man can find himself, flat on his belly in the mud of a hillside on the other side of the world, with the air full of metal and the boy beside him bleeding out into the dirt. The boy's name was Daniel Reyes, 19 years old. He'd carried a photograph of his baby sister in his helmet, and a habit of laughing at the wrong moments, the kind of laugh that kept a whole squad sane. When the position was about to be overrun, Walter Hayes had done a thing that he never once in 53 years described as brave. He'd just called it necessary. He'd gone back. 3 times, under fire that should have killed him on the first trip. He'd dragged wounded men down that hill to the medics. The last man he carried was Daniel, and Daniel didn't make it to the bottom alive. Before he went, Daniel had grabbed Walter's collar with a bloody hand and made him promise. You go home. You hear me? You go home, and you live enough for both of us. And someday you come find me. Bring it with you. He'd tapped the front of Walter's uniform, right where they pin the things they give you when there are no words big enough. You bring it, and you show me. Promise. Walter had promised. And for 53 years, life had gotten in the way, the cruel, ordinary way it does. A wife he loved and buried, work that broke his back and never quite paid the bills. A pension that shrank while the rent grew. He'd lived in the same small rooms, worn the same coat, eaten the cheap things, and he'd never once spent $1 on himself that he didn't have to. People who saw him on the street saw exactly what Bradley Carrington saw. An old man the world had used up and set down. They didn't see the canvas duffel. They didn't know that inside it, wrapped in a soft cloth, was every dollar Walter had managed to save for this one trip, the trip to the National Cemetery where Daniel Reyes had finally been laid to rest, so that an old man could kneel at a white stone and keep a promise to a 19-year-old who never got to grow old. That medal under his lapel, that was the it. That was what Daniel had told him to bring, and Bradley Carrington was busy demanding he be thrown off the plane. Sir, I need you to lower your voice, Anna said, and now there was steel under the sugar. You're disturbing the other passengers. I'm disturbing me? Bradley laughed, a sharp, ugly bark. He's the disturbance. Look at him. Smell him. I'll have your job for this. Do you know who I am? I move more money before breakfast than this airline makes in a quarter. 1 phone call. 1. And I promise you, this little uniform you're so proud of gone. A flight attendant further back had drifted closer now, sensing the temperature rise. A few passengers had stopped pretending to read. The cabin had that brittle, held-breath quality of a room waiting for something to break. Through all of it, Walter Hayes looked out the window at the grey tarmac and the men loading bags in the rain, and his thumb moved in a small, slow circle over the edge of the medal. Once. Twice. The way some people pray. You know what? Bradley stood up. He actually unbuckled his belt and stood, towering over the seated old man, using every inch of his height and his suit and his fury. I'm not asking anymore. I'm telling. Either he moves to the back where he belongs, or I'm getting off this plane, and the next call your CEO gets is from my lawyer. I am not. I refuse to be treated like this. And that was the moment a voice came from the front of the cabin. Sir, I'm going to need you to sit down. It wasn't loud. That was the strange thing. After all of Bradley's shouting, this voice was almost soft, but it carried. It had that quality certain voices have of being used to filling a room without effort, of expecting and receiving silence. A man had come through the curtain from the forward galley. He was tall, maybe 60, with a posture so straight it made everyone else in the cabin look like they were slouching. Silver hair cropped close. He wasn't in uniform, he wore a simple dark suit, but you didn't need a uniform to read what he was. It was in the way he stood. The way his eyes moved across the cabin like he was checking a perimeter. His name, though no one knew it yet, was Marcus Doyle. Lieutenant General, retired. 38 years of service. He'd boarded last, up in the very front, and he'd been listening to the whole ugly scene with a stillness that should have warned everyone. "And who are you?" Bradley rounded on him, looking for fresh blood. "Are you with the airline? Because if you're not, this is none of your—" I said, "Sit down." There it was again. Quiet. Final. Bradley opened his mouth, and something in the older man's flat grey stare made the words die. He sat. He didn't decide to sit. His body just did it. General Doyle didn't even look at him after that. He'd already turned away, the way you turn away from a thing you've finished with. He walked down the aisle, slow, and he stopped beside the window seat where Walter Hayes sat folding and refolding the edge of his coat. For a long moment, the general just looked at the old man, at the worn coat, at the cracked shoes, at the canvas duffel, and then his eyes found the small, tarnished medal pinned beneath the lapel, the dull blue ribbon, and the whole cabin watched the color drain right out of a man who looked like he'd never been afraid of anything in his life. "Sir," General Doyle said. His voice had changed. It had cracked, just slightly, down the middle. "Sir, would you permit me to see that?" Walter looked up at him, held his gaze, and then, slowly, he drew back the edge of his coat so the medal hung free in the cabin light. The general made a sound, a small, broken, involuntary sound, like the air had been knocked out of him. And then, in the middle of the first-class cabin, in front of 40 stunned strangers, Lieutenant General Marcus Doyle, who had commanded thousands of men, who had stood beside presidents, came to attention, spine like a steel rod, heels together, and his hand rose in a salute so crisp and so absolute that it made the air in the cabin feel thin. "It's the Medal of Honor," the general said, and he said it loud, loud enough for Bradley Carrington to hear every syllable. His arm did not lower. "The highest decoration this nation can give. They don't sell these. They don't lose these. There are only a handful of living men in this entire country who have earned this one." His voice was shaking now, and he didn't care who saw. "And I would know this man's face anywhere. I studied it at the academy. Every officer does. Sir, it is the honor of my life. Silence. The kind of silence that has weight." Walter Hayes looked at the trembling salute of a 3-star general, and his pale eyes went soft and wet, and he gave a small nod, the nod of a man who'd spent 53 years being looked through, finally being seen. "At ease, son," he said quietly. "You're making a fuss." But the general did not go to ease. Not yet. He held that salute 1 second longer, 2, 3, and then, slowly, he lowered it, and he turned around to face the cabin, and he found Bradley Carrington. You should have seen Bradley's face. The tan had gone the color of old paper. He was pressed back into his $11,000 seat like he was trying to disappear into it. The mouth that had run so freely a minute ago hung open with nothing coming out. "This man," General Doyle said. And now his voice filled the whole cabin without any effort at all. "This man you wanted moved to the back. This man you said hadn't worked a day in 30 years, went back up a hill 3 times under enemy fire to carry out wounded men who could not carry themselves. He was shot doing it. He kept going. He saved 9 lives that day, 9 families that still exist because of him. He let that land. He has spent his life asking this country for nothing. And you wanted to throw him off a plane because his coat was old. Somewhere behind them, a woman was crying quietly. The businessman who'd hidden in his laptop had closed it and was staring at Walter like he was seeing a ghost or a saint. Bradley found his voice, and it came out as a thin, scrambling thing. I didn't. How was I supposed to know? He didn't say anything. He didn't tell me who he shouldn't have to, the general said. That's the entire point. You don't get to be decent only to the people who can prove they outrank you. Here is where the world started to tilt for Bradley Carrington, and it tilted faster than he could have imagined. Because Anna, the flight attendant, had been standing very still through all of this, and now she stepped forward, and she was looking at Bradley with an expression that had nothing patient left in it. "Sir," she said sweetly, "you mentioned a closing dinner with the board of Halstead Industrial. You said it 3 times while you were boarding." She tilted her head. "It's a small world. The gentleman who chairs that board his father served, carried out on a stretcher by a man exactly like this one. He gives a speech about it every Veterans Day. I've seen it online." Her smile was a blade now. "I do hope your dinner goes well." The blood that was left in Bradley's face went too. Because Anna was right, and Bradley knew it the instant she said the name. The deal of his life. 2 years of work. A dinner where he was supposed to charm a room of people who, it turned out, would have walked over hot coals for the exact man Bradley had just spent 10 minutes trying to humiliate in front of a plane full of witnesses, several of whom, he now realized with a sick lurch, had their phones in their hands. "You can't," he whispered. "You can't film that. That's private." "You did it in public," the businessman said quietly. Not unkindly, just stating a fact. Out loud. To a war hero. The general crouched down beside Walter's seat then, all his thunder gone, just a man talking to a man. "Sir, where are you headed, if you don't mind my asking?" And Walter told him about Daniel Reyes, 19 years old, and the photograph in his helmet, and the promise made in the mud, and the white stone he was flying across the country to kneel beside with the medal in his hand, so a boy could finally see the it he'd asked for, 53 years late. He told it plain. No drama, no reaching for sympathy. Just the way a man tells the truth he's carried so long it's become part of his spine. And by the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in that cabin. The crying woman had given up hiding it. Anna had a hand pressed to her mouth. Even the businessman's jaw was tight. The general stood, and he wiped his eyes once, fast, with the back of his hand, the way men of his generation do when they'd rather you didn't notice. Then he turned to Anna. "What's the most this airline can do for a passenger?" he asked. "Right now, today." Anna didn't even have to think. "Leave it with me," she said. What happened over the next 6 hours, Bradley Carrington watched from his seat like a man watching his own funeral. The captain came back personally, and shook Walter Hayes's hand and thanked him and asked, with genuine humility, if there was anything at all he could do. Word had traveled up to the cockpit and down to the galley and, somehow, the way these things do, to the ground. When the plane landed, there would be people from the airline waiting at the gate. Not to move him to the back, to walk him through, to carry his duffel, to make sure an old man who'd spent 53 years being invisible was, for one day, treated like what he had always been. The general moved his own seat to sit beside Walter for the flight, and the two of them talked low and easy the whole way, two soldiers of different wars finding the language only they share. At one point Walter laughed, really laughed, and the sound of it went through the cabin like sunlight. And Bradley? No one threw him off the plane. No one shouted at him. That would have been too easy, and it would have made him the victim. And men like Bradley are very good at turning themselves into victims. Instead, something far worse happened. He was simply left. Ignored. The cabin that had a minute ago been afraid of his money, and his lawyer now looked at him, when it looked at him at all, the way you look at a stain on the carpet. His snapping fingers got no service, not rudely, just slowly, distantly, as if he'd become slightly transparent. The seat of honor he'd paid so much for had become the loneliest place on the aircraft. He spent the last hour of the flight on his phone, frantic, thumbs flying, trying to get ahead of a thing that was already gone. Because by then, a 40-second video, a sneering man in an expensive suit demanding a decorated war hero be thrown off a plane, and a 3-star general saluting that hero in the aisle had begun its quiet, unstoppable climb across the internet. The businessman hadn't posted it for cruelty. He'd posted it for the salute, for the beautiful thing. But the internet has a long memory and a sharp eye, and it did not miss the man in the $3,000 suit who'd started it all. By the time the wheels touched down, the dinner was already cancelled. A polite email, regret to inform. The board had decided to move in a different direction. 2 years of work, gone in the length of one flight, undone not by a rival or a market crash but by the oldest law there is. Be careful how you treat people, because you never, ever know who they really are. When the doors opened, the cabin did a thing Bradley would remember for the rest of his life. They waited. 40 people who could have rushed off to their connections and their lives sat still in their seats so that Walter Hayes could go first. And as the old man made his way up the aisle, slow, with his coat folded over his arm and his canvas duffel in his hand, and the dull blue medal catching the light, they stood, one by one, the whole cabin, on its feet. Someone started to clap, and then they all were, and the general walked one step behind him the entire way like an honor guard, and an old man who had spent 53 years being looked through walked off that plane through a corridor of people who would never look through anyone the same way again. He didn't pump his fist. He didn't gloat. He just nodded, small and shy, his eyes wet, and at the door he stopped and turned back, and his gaze found Bradley Carrington one last time, pale, alone, ruined, pressed into his expensive seat. And Walter Hayes didn't say a cruel word. He didn't have to. He just looked at him, kind and tired and sad, and said, "Son, I hope you find a way to be better than you were today. You've got time. A lot of fellas didn't." Then he turned and walked into the light of the jet bridge, and he was gone. He made it to the cemetery the next morning. The airline, it turned out, had quietly arranged a car. He knelt at the white stone that said, "Daniel Reyes," and for a long time he didn't say anything at all. Then he unpinned the medal from beneath his coat, the it Daniel had made him promise to bring, and he held it down close to the grass so the boy could see. "I brought it," he whispered. "I told you I would. I'm sorry it took so long, Danny. I'm sorry I made you wait." His voice broke. "I lived enough for both of us. I swear I did. Every day. I lived it for you." The wind moved through the rows of white stones, thousands of them, and an old man knelt alone in a brown coat that had been washed too many times, finally keeping a promise. "So let me ask you something, before you go. How many Walter Hayes do we walk past every single day? How many heroes have we written off because of an old coat, a tired face, a quiet seat in the corner? The terrible truth is that greatness rarely announces itself. It usually shows up looking like nothing at all, and the way we treat the people who can do nothing for us is the truest thing about who we really are." Bradley Carrington had everything money could buy, and not 1 ounce of the only thing that ever mattered. Walter Hayes had nothing the world counts, and he was the richest man on that plane. Be the cabin that stands up. Never be the man who stays seated. Now I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, have you ever watched someone get underestimated only for the truth to come out? And if you could say one thing to Walter Hayes, what would it be? I read every single one. If this story moved you even a little, do me a favor, give it a like so more people get to meet Walter. share it with someone who needs the reminder today, and subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the next story you won't be able to forget, because there's always another one. And the next person you underestimate might just be a hero.